When someone leaves too soon, especially as suddenly as Duane Allman did, what lingers isn't just grief, but a haunting sense of something left unfinished. His death in a motorcycle crash was heartbreaking on its own, but the tragedy deepened in hindsight. Years later, his daughter would write in her memoirs that the doctors made a mistake that day, a mistake that's hard to forgive. Duane was a force of nature, a musical hurricane. With his brother Greg, he helped form the Allman Brothers Band, a group that reached the peak of its creative power just before Duane's untimely end. For those who heard him play, he wasn't just a guitar virtuoso. He was the voice of Southern rock soul. He was born in 1946 in Nashville, Tennessee, a city where the streets seemed paved with guitar strings and the echoes of country legends. Just 13 months later, Greg was born. The family didn't stay in Nashville for long. Their father, a military officer, received orders to relocate to Norfolk, Virginia. It was there, in post-war America, that their childhood was shattered. On Christmas night in 1949, their father, Lieutenant Willis Allman, and a friend gave a ride to a stranger after some drinks at a bar. What started as a simple act of kindness turned into a nightmare. The man lured them to a remote farm, pulled a gun, and robbed them. In the struggle that followed, Willis was shot and killed. The house went quiet. Life split into before and after. Their mother, Geraldine, was left alone with 2 boys. She could no longer afford to be a homemaker. To support her sons, she trained to become an accountant. Hoping to give them structure and stability, she enrolled them in a military academy in Tennessee. But the boys weren't cut out for life in uniform. They chafed against the rules, something inside them craving freedom. In 1957, the family moved to Daytona Beach, Florida. There, under the sun and salt-heavy air, a new chapter began. During summers, the boys would return to Nashville to visit their grandmother. It was on a quiet neighbor's porch that the magic began. A neighbor taught Greg how to play guitar. By 1960, he had saved up enough to buy his first instrument, a Japanese-made Silvertone. Duane, meanwhile, had other dreams. He had his eye on a Harley 165 motorcycle. But like many brothers, he wanted both. Though he was left-handed, he began borrowing Greg's guitar, playing it right-handed as if something in him demanded it. Freedom, sound. But the motorcycle turned out to be a dark omen. Duane crashed it not long after. The wrecked bike was still worth something, and he used the money to buy a Silvertone of his own. That was the beginning. Before long, Duane was the better guitarist of the two. It was as if nature had placed something in his fingertips that couldn't be taught. In Daytona, the brothers started playing in local bands. Stages, lights, the first taste of applause. Music got into their blood. It became their purpose, their salvation, their truth. Once they felt the electricity of a guitar line pulsing with the beat of their hearts, there was no going back. It was like a revelation. That's where the journey began. A long, tragic, glorious path. Duane would never grow old, but he left behind a sound that still echoes, refusing to fade. He lived as if he knew his time was short, as if every chord, every note from his guitar carried a cry, desperate, raw, and relentless. Duane Allman was never chasing peace, he craved motion, the stage, the open road. In the 1960s, when the southern air was thick with music and dreams, he dropped out of school, leaving behind everything that didn't sound like the blues. By 1965, his first band, the Escorts, was already opening for the Beach Boys. It felt like the dream was coming true. But it all fell apart as quickly as it began. The band broke up. Still, fate had its own plans. His brother Greg graduated, and together with a few remaining members, they formed a new band, the Allman Joys. They crisscrossed the South, gig after gig, chasing something bigger. Eventually, they made it to Nashville, ready to build something lasting. That's when Hourglass was born. But Duane kept living on the edge. One day, he vanished for 3 days. Then he burst back into the hotel room, glowing with joy. I went to Daytona Beach, proposed to Patty Chanley. Then we drove to South Carolina and got married. Impulsive, reckless, unstoppable. That was Duane. But he was never one for domestic life. Like much of his world, that marriage burned bright and fast. They had a daughter, but he didn't stay long. The band moved to Los Angeles, dreaming of a breakthrough. They landed a deal with Liberty Records. It seemed like a win. They recorded 2 albums, but the label tried turning them into pop stars. The brothers, though, breathed Southern rock. It wasn't just a creative clash. It was a crack in the foundation. The contract fell apart. Hourglass faded into the past. Back in Florida, Duane and Greg started working with a group called the 31st of February. Behind the drums was Butch Trucks. No one knew it then, but history was already in motion. Within weeks, a new band emerged, the Allman Brothers Band. They headed to New York with more than just hope. Felt like destiny. Their debut album dropped in November of 1969. It didn't take off. Still, they kept going. Around the same time, Duane's marriage to Patty ended for good. And in St. Louis, history repeated itself. He met Donna Rusman. They fell in love, and soon came another daughter, Galadriel. But again, the romance was brief. Another family left behind. The stage was calling. The sky, the roar of the crowd, the thunder of amplifiers. That was his home. By 1970, he had already survived an opium overdose right after a show. But to stop, that wasn't in him. That year alone, the band played over 300 nights. In between gigs, they recorded their second album and lived together in a big house in Macon, Georgia. That house would become legend. The days there were soaked in music, alcohol, friendship, and bursts of inspiration. Even in that chaos, there were ruptures. Duane kicked Donna and their young daughter out of the house. Like so much in his life, it happened suddenly, fiercely, without breaks. He didn't build, he burned. Relationships, days, himself. There was something restless in him, something almost faded, something that kept pushing him forward, even if the road led nowhere. But anyone who ever heard him play knew. He spoke to the world in a language that hearts could understand. Duane Allman didn't just play music. He lived it. And maybe, just maybe, it was his only true love. Her name was Dixie Lee Meadows, and when she stepped into his life, it was as if a long dormant flame flickered back to life. She stirred something in him that had been quiet for far too long. Inspired by their connection, he created something rare and deeply personal. The only song he ever wrote entirely by himself, from the very first note to the last. He called it Little Martha, and he dedicated it to Dixie. But within that melody wasn't just music. It was the whisper of love itself, fragile and fleeting like smoke drifting above a winding road. Meanwhile, the band was barely off the road. City to city, stage to stage, they chased something they couldn't quite grasp. Their big house back home, once a symbol of hope, began to feel more like a dream growing ever more distant. Fame and fortune remained stubbornly out of reach. Their second album, Idlewild South, came out in August of 1970 and struggled to climb the charts.